So much. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us at the deep dive session on hunger hotspots and the Humanitarian Development Nexus, Agriculture Research, and School Feeding for Global Stability. Yes, it's a very long, wonky title because we can't help ourselves. Thank you also to those who are joining us online. In a short bit, I'm going to welcome our panelists that are here in person to join me on stage. But I do want to spend about 5 minutes framing our time together. I am Reverend Eugene Cho. I serve as the president, CEO of Bread for the World. Bread is a Christian advocacy organization urging U.S. decision makers to do all that they can to pursue a nation and world without hunger. If you're interested in learning more, you can check out bread.org. Across the globe, hunger hotspots continue to emerge as conflict and climate shocks and economic instability disrupt food systems. This, of course, translates into a deep cost to human well-being, flourishing, and lives. Just to give you some context, probably statistics that some of you might be familiar with, in 2024, an estimated 295 million human beings, people, in 53 countries faced crisis level of worst acute food insecurity. That's the highest level recorded in recent years. And behind these numbers are families, communities caught between crisis and recovery, struggling to rebuild their lives with limited support. At Bread for the World, we've been tracking these trends closely through our Hunger Hotspots briefing series, which has highlighted how overlapping crises are driving hunger and where policy action and investment can make the greatest difference. The evidence is clear. Hunger is not just a symptom of scarcity, but of fragility. And the systems that either protect or fail or abandon people in moments of crisis. Bread recently celebrated our 50th anniversary, 5 decades of collective advocacy rooted in faith and grounded in evidence. And over those years, we've seen that progress against hunger is possible, but only when we act with urgency, compassion, and unity. Unfortunately, 3 things that seem to be so challenging today. Today's conversation builds on that legacy, asking an urgent question: how can we move from reacting to emergencies toward building resilience and stability? As some of you might know, too often humanitarian assistance and long-term development are treated as separate tracks, but they are deeply interconnected. The same investments that help communities survive a crisis, access to food, nutrition, and livelihoods, are also what allows them to recover and thrive. When we link humanitarian response, agricultural innovation, and social protection programs like school meals, we create a bridge that not only saves lives, but builds the foundation for peace and prosperity. This is the essence of the Humanitarian Development Nexus, aligning short-term relief with long-term resilience so that we can address both urgent needs and systemic causes of hunger. That's the framing for our conversation today. I'm honored to be joined by an exceptional panel of leaders who bring diverse experience across research, operations, and humanitarian response. At this time, I'm going to invite our panelists that are here in person to join us here. Dr. Ibnu Dieng, Director of Strategic Planning and Chief of Staff at the International Institute of Tropical Agriculture, bringing deep expertise on how agriculture research strengthens food systems and resilience. We have Chris Green, CEO of Meds and Food for Kids, sharing insights from Haiti on locally driven nutrition solutions that connect humanitarian and development work, especially through school meals. Virtually, we also have two that are joining us. Amir Abdallah, a commissioner with the Kofi Annan Commission on Food Security, joining us virtually, offering a global perspective on the evolving hunger landscape and the need for coordinated action. And Marek Kamalazadi, and if I've missed your name, my apologies, head of the Data and Monitoring Initiative of the School Meals Coalition at the World Food Program, highlighting how school feeding programs serve as both humanitarian lifelines and long-term investments in human capital. If you would just join me just for a second and just welcome our panelists together. Let's give them a big round of applause. All right. Well, I'd like to begin the first question, and panelists have been instructed to steward about 4 or 5 minutes in these first questions. The first question is to Amir. What trends are defining hunger hotspots now, and what lessons can we carry forward about bridging humanitarian and development responses, especially related to children's food and nutrition security? Amir?
Thank you, Reverend Eugene, and a pleasure to be joining you, even if only virtually. I'll just check you are getting my sound, yes?
Yes.
Good. So let me carry on. As you yourself have just said, Reverend Eugene, most, if not all, hunger hotspots today are a result of one or more of conflict, climate crisis, or poverty. And all too often, all three factors are present and compounding one another. Gaza, Sudan, the DRC, they're all clear examples of this. But I would actually argue, to come to your other point on the so-called nexus, the very terms humanitarian and development, when talking about responses to alleviate hunger and improve food and nutrition security, sometimes create the very gap that we then talk about bridging and seek to find that ever diminishing nexus. What we really need to do, as you've alluded to yourself, is we need to focus on sustainable solutions that empower those who we are trying to assist rather than the labels we use. Now, this is easier said than done, as all too often funding and financing mechanisms are stuck in the archaic view of assistance that dates back decades. And I'm sorry, but all too often there is a vested interest of donors sometimes to maintain this archaic system. Now, true human development is as humanitarian as any emergency or crisis response and should be funded accordingly. And finally, my view is that we need to focus on the root causes and the removal of them. Now, this is going to say, as you just said yourself, will involve holistic approaches, many actors engaged, and will need a very coordinated approach. I remember very, very early in my career, this is going back to 1994, which shows how long ago this was. It was in Angola, in the middle of still the war was raging, and we had displaced people in the city of Malanche. And there, because the women mainly, the farmers had come out of the fields and they had lost their cassava crops. So what we were doing with the so-called humanitarian assistance we were providing, these women were growing cassava roots, and then they would take these cuttings back to the fields to plant them when peace allowed them to go back home and to their fields. But at the same time, the green leaf of the plant was providing nutrition for their children. Now, we were calling this an emergency humanitarian response in the middle of the road. From my mind, it was really helping with the human development of those people. So those would be my points, that we just really need to focus on what we're doing rather than what we're calling it.
Thank you so much, Amir, very much. So much that we can respond to, but we're going to go through the panelists and then we'll circle back. Dr. Dieng, thank you so much for joining us. We spoke a little earlier and you've been traveling all over the world, so thank you for being awake. That's the first thing I want to say. How can agricultural research reduce vulnerability and build resilience in fragile contexts?
Thank you, Reverend Cho. Good morning, distinguished colleagues, friends, and partners. It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting. So, resilience in fragile contexts is about people. We have heard Reverend Cho highlight the statistics that we have, people that face hunger. Hunger is fragility, we know it. In the context of Africa, we are thinking of all the farmers that face uncertain rains, waking up every day without knowing if the rain will come. All those women who can feed entire families, from a single plot. We can also think of the youth with their hope, their seed, and then their soil, and the hope that, agriculture will bring a great future. So the question is not about to produce more food to answer the questions, but how to sustain life, livelihood, and dignity. So at the International Institute of Tropical Agriculture, which is a CGR system centers I work with, and across the CGR in global, we answer these questions of sustaining life and livelihood by science. We science through partnership. We work to co-design innovation with the people that need them most. In the northern Nigeria, for instance, in the Sahel region, in the eastern, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, we have the diversity of agroecological conditions in Africa. These tropical conditions, of course, are favorable for agriculture, but they bring also challenges. The pest and disease, the drought and the heat. And to overcome those challenges, in the front line as the smallholder farmers, their ingenuity, are there. But of course, we back that with research, R&D, and CGI and partners are working with the farmers to overcome those. So we help, for instance, developed to help farmers to rebuild with drought-tolerant and disease-resistant varieties. We help to scale innovation across the value chains. For instance, for key crop like cassava and yam and many others, soybean, maize, and coffee. An example has been for the cassava value chain this year, one of our technology that we are promoting received the 2025 Africa Food Prize. We received it through one of our colleagues, the lady we have here and on the screen, Dr. Mercy Jibiri Ojo, who is a scientist, a brilliant scientist working with the IITA. So her work was about rapid multiplication of cassava planting. So she managed to have clean planting material that can be faster 10,000 times compared to traditional methods. 10,000 times, and this is very impressive.
Wow.
But of course, science is one aspect, and the second aspect is scaling. And we know that the scaling in extension in Africa fails for most of the case, unfortunately. So the way to overcome that is to reach farmers who are from developing digital tools. And but what I wanted to say here is all those solutions are built and adapted to local conditions so that we reach the real farmers with real conditions. So agriculture alone cannot carry the weight of resilience, we know it. It must connect with market, with nutrition policy and social protections. An example is school meal. When we source from local farmers, we stabilize the market and we add nutrition values. And this become a development driver. Program like the Technology for African Agricultural Transformation at the TAT funded by the African Development Bank and the IITA Youth Agripreneur Program in Africa have shown that when innovation meets entrepreneurship, the youth become agent of recovery. So this is what you have seen. Too often, science arrives after the shock. Of course, we know that. But resilience requires anticipation, not reaction. So to do that, we try to develop, in the context of climate change, climate-smart varieties, develop early maturating varieties. Then when farmers are facing like shortage in rains, when they plant their crops, they can get like a suitable production. So we also use digital decision support tool to forecast weather, soil and pest and all those examples. So, but at the end of the day, it's about giving farmers and government the power to prepare and not to adapt. So we have a lot of examples in there. Resilience is not built by one single institution, we know it. It is co-created through partnership. It's about connecting the lab to the field, the researchers to farmers, and then the science to the policies and investment. And because when the farmer, the scientist, and the policymaker, they push and pull together, resilience become a reality. And then my last slide, we have seen here our impact, our objective, our goal is to feed Africa through science and partnership. So we see here in the map where we are present. So our headquarters are in Nigeria, in West Africa, where we operate. But we have also hubs. So we are operating all across Africa. We have the Western Africa hub. We have the Sant in light green here. We have the Central Africa hub. The HQ is based in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Dark green, we have the Sahel region. The hub is based in Bamako, Mali, the Eastern Africa, in Tanzania, and the Southern Africa in Lusaka, Zambia. So those are the HQ, where we have infrastructures, where we have people, labs, and so on, where we implement our activities. But we have also country offices, where we have still infrastructure and facilities. So the hubs are blue in the maps, and the country stations are red in the map. But we also have staff when we don't have infrastructure posted in many other countries and hosted by local institutions. So in total, we have between 25 and 30 countries across Africa. So we see here the figures. At the end of the day, and in summary, to answer the questions, how to sustain livelihood, and dignity, we think that agricultural research can do it when it is localized, when it is connected, when it is anticipatory, and when it is collaborative. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. I want to give you a heads up. We've got a couple more panelists that we want to hear from. But in case you might be an introvert, we are going to break out in groups here. So you want to muster up some energy and strength, and we'll spend about 10 minutes in groups asking you to reflect on some questions and perhaps share some of the insight with the larger group as well. So I want to go back online at this time, and I want to speak with Marek. Marek, you and I spoke last week, and one of the topics of conversation was the State of School Feeding Worldwide report that came out recently. Please tell us how we're doing and how school feeding programs can simultaneously save lives in crises and serve as long-term investments in stability and human capital. We look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you very much, Reverend Eugene. I also have some slides. I hope they come on shortly. Yes. So thank you very much for mentioning our latest publication. This is a biannual report of the World Food Program, and it presents the latest evidence and figures on how we're doing in terms of school meals. And I have to say that the news overall is quite remarkably good. School meals is a huge opportunity, and a program, if you can go to the next slide maybe, and a program that is present in virtually every country across the globe. The latest data that we have from several different sources including the GCNF that conducts a biannual survey of governments, tells us that at least 466 million children across the globe are currently receiving school meals. If you can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. The good news, in addition to the fact that this is such a ubiquitous social safety net across the globe, is that the speed at which this program has been growing has been accelerating over the last few years and since the publication that came out in 2020. This is quite a remarkable increase that we have in just a few years of 80 million more children that are being reached by the school meals programs. It's about a 20% increase in this short period of time. If you can go to the next slide, please. Additionally, what is important to note is that the increase and the progress is happening in places where it is needed the most. In particular, I wanted to highlight that the largest increase is happened in the recent years in low-income countries. It's nearly a 60% scale up for low-income countries. In terms of region, the Africa region is leading in progress. And we have countries that you can see on the slide here, just some examples of countries that have been scaling up extremely rapidly their school meals programs, including Rwanda, Ethiopia, Madagascar, and Kenya. And there are other examples across the continent of Africa. Now, I don't want to sound as if the work is done and we can be complacent, even though the progress is biggest in low-income countries. It's still the low-income countries are still the ones that are the ones with the lowest coverage and have still a very big distance to go to reach all the children. Similarly, although all of the governments that we are surveying and compiling the data from, and they're all investing in their own programs, it is still clear that in low-income countries there is a relatively large dependence on external funds and external support. Now, if you can go to the next slide, please. Finally, besides just the latest snapshot of what is happening in terms of numbers, the State of School Feeding report provides the latest evidence on the impact of school meals. And it's the impact in terms of humanitarian impact and also how school meals has truly become a policy lever for countries to have impact on multiple policy goals. And it truly has become a way of advancing national development. I hope you can take some time to read a bit more yourselves, but I will just give you some examples of what we found. In terms of just in general, we can say that the latest value for money studies that have been conducted show that every dollar invested in school meals programs generates between $7 and $35 in economic benefits across multiple sectors that you see on the slide. In terms of social protection and response to shocks and emergencies, school meals continues to be the most ubiquitous social safety net in the world, and now we have evidence on how it has worked in particularly in two cases of COVID-19 pandemic and the 2008 financial crisis, and how it provided a safety net and what the role of school meals was in that context. We also find that the transfer that is provided through school meals goes up to 20% of annual household food expenditure amongst the poorest households. School meals can be leveraged to meet basic food needs, reduce short-term hunger, provide an income transfer to parents and caregivers, and support continuity of education and act as an important incentive to continue sending children to school. As far as the link to development is concerned, there is evidence across different sectors: education, health and nutrition, agriculture, and food systems. Some of the latest findings that we're quite excited about and is very important, for example, in education, there is emerging evidence that not only does school meals keep children in school and provide an incentive for households to send kids in school and basically improves schooling outcomes, it also has a link to actual learning outcomes, and that's something that will need continued research, but the evidence is very much promising. There is a special report in this edition of the State of School Feeding focusing on food systems and agriculture, and the opportunity that school meals provides to improve outcomes, both in terms of the consumption of food and behaviors, as well as the production of food and a more planet friendly procurement policies, for example. So those are some of the things that you can read in the latest report. If you go to the last slide, there is you can please explore the report. You can see you can scan and read it for yourself. It's available in several languages, as well as we hope that you explore our global database, where you can find the data based on which we've compiled the report. Thank you very much.
All right, Marek, thank you so much. Chris, we're going to go to you here. We've heard the word localization numerous times for obvious reasons. It's important. I think you have a lot of insight to share. And so how can locally driven, nutrition-sensitive approaches in humanitarian settings strengthen both, again, immediate and long-term solutions?
Yeah, thank you, Eugene, and thanks everyone for being here. I want to start off with just sort of painting the backdrop. So our Meds and Food for Kids works in Haiti. It's no secret to anyone that Haiti is facing challenges currently and has for quite some time. We're talking about right now that over 50% of the population is facing acute food insecurity, and over 50% of the food available in country has to be imported, right? Now, I like to tell a story of like when I go to Haiti and sometimes I'm visiting schools, it's so interesting to see on the outside, there may be roadblocks, there is diesel fuel shortages, inflation is rising, there's food scarcity, and you can walk into a school and you can see children all across the country eating this little highly nutritious school snack called Vita Mamba, which we make in Haiti. And this is so powerful to me because it really is a symbol of driving home just what can be done when we focus on localization. And what I want to really talk on is when we talk about this humanitarian development nexus, right? How do these two things come together? Why is it so important that we begin to focus our programs and our activities? Let's talk about humanitarian aid for just a second, right? In acute scenarios, it works wonders. We could not ask for better systems than the ones we have had in place, where an acute problem can show up overnight, and the next day we are there and we are meeting that need. But too often, unfortunately, that humanitarian aid persists and persists, and it actually doesn't end. And the very systems that the very crisis that initially addressed ends up becoming actually systems that create dependency, and oftentimes actually create the very roadblocks to progress that we all want to see and hope for. We've seen this numerous times in Haiti and in other locations. And so what Meds and Food for Kids, what we have tried to focus on, we've been in Haiti for over 20 years. We have a staff of almost 90 all local staff. We're based in the north part of Haiti where we manufacture ready-to-use therapeutic food. So we sort of look at this and we say, what we have seen is that if we want to end hunger, we can't just say it's about feeding people. It's also about addressing the systems that are perpetuating these crises, right, that are allowing them to exist. Because unfortunately, the other challenge we see in humanitarian aid is that when the systems become dependent on it, and then what happens when the funding goes away, right? We see that now in ways that we haven't in a long time. We need to think about a more resilient, long-term, sustainable solutions, right? How do we marry these two together? How do we create this nexus? And so what we do is we address the short term, right? We, in Haiti, we create ready-to-use therapeutic food. It's there to address severe acute malnutrition in children that are 6 months to 2 years of age. It is made locally, it's distributed locally. We make sure that those children that cannot wait receive that acute care they need. But we also look at it in a bigger, broader, long-term perspective. We work with farmers across the country. We have agriculture extension programs. We work with those farmers to, whether it be help connect them with research centers and partners in the US, so that we're developing varieties that are more disease resistant, more drought resistant. Now, that's great from an efficiency standpoint, but on the ground, when you're a farmer who doesn't have crop insurance, when you're a farmer who, whether or not your kids go to school, in fact, whether or not your family survives depends on what you were able to successfully grow and take to market, it's a very different ballgame. And I think many of us can connect with that, especially the farmers we would have in the room. In Haiti, we are trying to pursue the same things. You want to have dependable marketplaces, right? You want to have fair prices. You want to be able to work your land in a way where it continues to be an asset and not a liability. You want to be able to pass that on to the next generation. It's the same goals, the same pursuit of dignity, just in a different context, a different climate. So we work with these farmers. We help increase these yields. We help make sure the information and the knowledge is out there so that more nutritionally dense agricultural products make it to that marketplace. We then purchase those agricultural products. Through our factory, we produce not just ready-to-use therapeutic food, but Vida Mamba, right? Again, this school snack that this year we're on target, this 2025-2026 school year, we're on target for 70,000 Haitian school children to be receiving this every single day. This is an environment where a snack isn't just, oh, well, that was nice. These are oftentimes children that are coming to school. They may or may not have eaten that morning, and they may or may not have food when they come home in the evening. And then they're getting this locally made, locally sourced, nutritionally dense product, right? This is the power of localization. You know, one of the things, there's probably a few things I would love people to walk away with, but one of the things is that when we in humanitarian development, when we focus on building local capacity, it becomes development. When we bypass local capacity, it perpetuates dependency. We have got to continue to think about how do we ensure that the humanitarian aid that we need today isn't just addressing the crisis of today, but is also addressing this long-term need. And the research side, right? Again, collaboration with Vida Mamba was created in partnership with the USDA, with universities in the United States, with private partnerships. There are some amazing opportunities for us to work together in a way where we are still able to use our resources to support, but doing so in a way that we're ensuring that we're not, that we're creating the resilient long-term solutions internally. So maybe in closing, I would say that in fragile settings, the nexus of humanitarian aid and development is how we translate compassion into actual resilience. We need to look at things like school meals is not just charity, but is actually the creation of the infrastructure, right, that is needed for a better tomorrow. That agriculture is not peripheral to peace, it is actually peace in motion, right? We need to, if we say we want something, we need to pursue the policies and activities that actually will achieve that thing we desire. And I would say that when we're facing these complex problems and we acknowledge that they require comprehensive solutions, that they should be humanitarian when needed, always developmental by design, and local at every level.
That's great. Thank you so much. We're going to do a little pivot here, and as I promised, we want to spend and give you an opportunity to connect with one another. And so I'd love to encourage you. We're going to have 3 questions that will flash up on screen, and we want to encourage you. I think there's 3 questions up on screen, but if you could connect with like maybe 3 or 4 other people around you, and we want to ask you to reflect upon these 3 questions. And so again, if you're an introvert, stick it through, stay with us. But if you could just think about maybe engaging one or a couple of these questions. So could you turn to about 3 or 4 people, obviously introduce yourself. You have 10 minutes to help solve the world's woes, okay? All right, thank you so much. And we'll circle back in 10 minutes. Don't leave. All right, 1 minute before we come back together. All right, friends, can we circle back together? All right, thank you so much for joining in on these discussions, and my sincere apologies for ending what seems to be a very energizing conversation. We've got about 10 minutes before we have to land this plane. All right, thank you so much for circling back. So we have about 10 minutes before we circle back. I want to give a heads up to our panelists. I'm going to kind of do an audible. The question I want to ask you before we ask the group to chime in is, what feels promising and what is a warning that you might give to those who are here and anyone that might be listening? And we'll circle back in a couple of minutes. But folks, those that are in our audience today, we'd love to just devote a few minutes if there was something particularly insightful, challenging, encouraging, invigorating in your group that you would want to share with the larger group. We have these microphones here, and I know it's always hard to break the ice, but we will give you first dibs on coffee afterwards. If you have any remarks, reflections, who would like to break the ice? We have maybe time for, yes, go for it. Perfect. If you could just introduce yourself, maybe who you're with, and again, we have limited time, so please steward that wisely.
Okay,
Yeah.
I will promise to keep it short. Hello, everyone. My name is Schaefer Castella, and I work for CNFA. We focus on agricultural and market development in emerging economies. And I think something that Inez, one of our group colleagues, came up with was talking about, okay, all of these wonderful school meal programs that many donors have for many years supported, unfortunately, are facing cuts.
Yeah.
And how can maybe some of this evidence be taken to those governments, showing this return on investment, showing the impact that these public-private partnerships can have to change policy, to change decision makers' opinions, and make some of these programs more sustainable.
Amazing. I know this is not a religious gathering, but amen. Amen. Just for what it's worth, I had a conversation a couple of weeks ago with somebody in the administration, and all they talked about was school meals. Now, of course, the attention was funding, but I was encouraged that they elevated and saw the deep, deep power of school meals. So thank you. Anyone else on either side? Yes, sir, please.
I have a question for a colleague from IITA. I worked at IITA for 20 years, from 69 through 87. And I was getting, along with many other colleagues, corn yield of 5 tons, 6 tons per hectare. Beans yield, coffee yield about half a ton per hectare. Yam, cassava, maybe 20 tons per hectare. The yield of cereals for sub-Saharan Africa 40 years after, is still about 1.5 ton per hectare on continental scale. What is holding it back? Why this science not been translated into action?
It's great.
Thank you so much. That is a great question. And so we have a lot of, ingredients to put in place to have it. So basically, what it is about is moving from the yield we have at stations to the yield we have at the farmer's field. So this is the issue that we are facing. So at station, for instance, for the cassava, what you have seeing is at station and some controlled environment, you can go even to 45 tons per hectare whereas in the farmers field we have around 5 tons per hectare. For the cereals, exactly I second what you are saying. So in the farmers field, so the yield is not reaching what we have usually in on the station. So a lot of explanation over there. Of course, we need to close the good agricultural practices. You know, the extension services are failing. We need some investment at the country level. You know, we need to align science and investment and then policy. So we are not yet there. We need the engagement, of course, at like regional level, at the research level, of course. But most of the job need to be done at the country level, where there is the place where investment need to be done, so that we can push the technology at scale. But the question is large and difficult to answer.
Perhaps ongoing conversation after the session. Anytime previous laureates ask questions, you've got to answer those questions. Any other comments? Maybe we've got time for one or two more, I believe. Yes, sir, go for it.
Yeah, Rolf Clem with Helen Keller International. I guess it's a question, and the question is, to what end is school feeding directed? Is it to meet a nutritional gap? Is it to keep children in school? And I think context really differs. So I think just speaking about school feeding in general is probably not nuanced enough, because I certainly have seen situations where school feeding is probably not meeting a nutritional gap, and in fact, and in other cases where it very much is, and in other cases where it's really critical just to keep kids in school, and it really has a learning, the real piece there is learning. And I don't think we speak about that in really nuanced ways. We just talked about school feeding being good.
Yeah.
Good for what, and what really is the outcome that's driving that particular school feeding program? And I'd really like to hear people speak about that.
Let me use that to maybe as a transition. I want to go back to our panelists. Feel free to engage that question, but I think within this question, you might be able to answer some of this or other things that are on your mind. From a religious perspective, we talk about the words pastoral and prophetic. And so in other words, we talk about what feels promising in your work during this time, but what would be the prophetic or the warning that you might give to an audience like us or to others who might be watching, including elected leaders of governments? And so I would love to start off with you, Amir, online. Would love to hear from you. And again, because of limited time, maybe about 60 to 90 seconds a person.
Okay, just to pick up on that, I think for me, the school meals programs really, they do have both of those objectives, and I agree with the question in a sense. It has to be seen as context specific. I would just point out, if you haven't read the Kofi Annan Foundation, the report that the Commission on Food Security and the Governance of Food Security, which highlights the value of school meals as an excellent conduit for social protection. If you haven't read the report, I would encourage you to do so. And finally, I think one of the best ways we can use humanitarian funding is actually assisting farmers, particularly women farmers, to grow food that is then used in school meals programs. That will help them economically, nutritionally, and educationally. Thank you.
Great. Marek.
Yes, thank you very much. I will try to address very quickly some of the things that came up. So first of all, about funding. I didn't mention this, but what we see is that overall 99% of funding comes from actual governments. They are funding their own programs. Yes, of course, for low-income countries, there's still a portion that comes externally, but we have to kind of see it in a humble way that our relative as WFP or as other contributors, external contributors to the program, globally speaking, is quite small. And I think also what is important was some of the new multilateralism around school meals. I don't think we really need to convince governments anymore that school meals is something worth investing in. I think there has been a shift from a donor-driven program to something that governments truly own and want to invest in. And the School Meals Coalition, with now 112 members, is a great example where some of these discussions are happening. I think what governments want to understand better, and that kind of links to the second question that was posed around the quality and what policies it's potentially linked to. How do you design a good program, a good school meals program? What is the modality? There are basically endless choices in terms of design, how it's done, how the procurement is implemented, and what are those models that really work that can be adapted to context. So I think those are more the kinds of questions that governments are seeking answers to, rather than just being convinced that this is something good to invest in. I think that all the research and all the efforts from everyone, including people in the room, have, globally speaking, changed hearts and minds. So I think we should congratulate ourselves on that part.
Thank you. Dr. Deng, we have a minute.
Thank you, Reverend Cho. So at IITA and the CGIAR, we believe that feeding the continent will start with empowering the farmers we have. Accessing them, making them access the technology that we have developed, working at scale. But this will be possible only when science, innovation, partnership, and investment are done. And if the right investment are done, we think and we believe that Africa can feed itself. We are not yet there, but this is something that we can hope.
Chris?
Yeah, I want to comment on, I think your question about nuance is critical. Let's just be honest, we live in a time and place where no one actually wants to talk about nuance in almost anything. There are very few things that are just black and white, that there are very few onions that just have one layer to peel, right? It's multiple layers. So I think nuance is key. I think curiosity, and I think humility. Because the other thing that we run into is we often assume, because we know more, because we've done more successful programs, that what we know and what we've done must just be the default best solution in X environment, right? I worked in Nigeria, and so of course it'll work in Haiti, right? So I think those things are key. I love that idea of nuance. I do think, depending on the environment, as you said, you're going to check all the boxes in some places. You're going to check some of the boxes in others, right? Is it filling a gap? Is it bringing more kids to school? Is it filling the gap, bringing the kids to school, and which allows mom to actually work more, increasing that family's income potential and possibility, right? There's all these levels that we should be asking and we should be measuring against. I think the opportunity and the risk. The opportunity is in the midst of, what they say, that, in the midst of crisis is when we become our most creative, right? When we don't just rest on our assumptions and we go back to the table and we look at what we've been doing and say, is this really producing? My resources are scarce. I've got to be strategic on how I use them. So I think that's the opportunity, right? Right now we are talking about humanitarian aid and development nexus in ways we were not doing even 2 years ago. Right now we are talking about localization in ways that I almost never heard 2 or 3 years ago. So to me, those are huge opportunities. The risk is that in crisis, we like to take the shortest route to the solution that we want. And oftentimes that expedient solution, while it meets the need, it checks the box today, it does not build the systems that we need to make sure tomorrow is actually a better tomorrow. So our risk is we're going to have to fight that urge, and I'll give a quick shout out to WFP, because I think in Haiti, there's a great example of how this is happening. We have to fight the urge to just take the most expedient solution. World Food Program and MFK have partnered this year to increase the number of farmers being trained by about 960. Over half of those are women farmers, right? So this is in the midst of chaos, in the midst of turmoil, in the midst of uncertainty. WFP is doubling down with local partners to ensure that the systems that are needed for a better tomorrow are happening. The other thing is World Food Program has goals to have 100% of school feeding locally procured, right? So again, doubling down that sometimes local procurement on day one is not as cheap or simple or easy, is just importing the solution. But importing the solution outside of acute crisis, I would argue, is never the answer, right? And so these to me are opportunities of organizations that are choosing, even in the crunch, even in the press, to make the investments that are actually going to see tomorrow look different than today.
That's great. Let me just wrap up in a minute. Again, thank you so much for your patience. Just a quick story that I love sharing because it reminds me of why I do what I do. My father is turning 90 in a couple of months. And he often shares stories of growing up in a small little village outside of a city called Pyongyang. He was born in Korea. This is before the war. And the stories that he shares about hunger and food insecurity are just hard to believe. Eating grass from the ground to consume hunger pangs. But along the way, there were individuals, there were private enterprises, there were churches. He shares stories about meeting two men one day. They were named Kyung-Chik Han, who was a pastor of a local church, and a man named Bob Pierce, who started World Vision. And then, of course, Korea was one of the recipients of the IDA grant through the World Bank, and there were other numerous programs. And I'm reminded of that again about what could be possible in an imperfect world when committed people come together for solutions. So on behalf of Bread for the World, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to our panelists, and obviously, thank you to the World Food Prize Foundation for allowing this dialogue to take place. Blessings to you.
Well done.